So quickly, before we do anything, I forgot to do this. I always forget. Romance.js. So Romance.js is your second optional, 100% optional project. And the workshop is open, so do it if you want. Send me your solution. I will look at it and whatever. So basically, this is 100% optional. The directions are available on LearnDot. So pretty much you're going to be writing this function that takes in like a corpus of text, so like a speech, a song, or a poem or something. And then you have to use something called the Markov chain to turn input into n lines of new text. So your output would be a new poem based off of how many lines I want, off of the text that you are doing this on, you know?
So this would be like a function that takes in string and outputs other string, right?
It takes in a string and a number of lines, and it returns like a poem based of that many lines you put in based off of that string. And every time you run it, it'll be randomized. It'll be a randomized poem.
Is this how chatbots are created on like certain chat applications?
No.
Wow.
So you complete this whenever you want. You could send me your work whenever you want. Obviously, I doubt any of you will do this tonight, but yeah, we're not going to do this category stuff. So sorry. But yeah, that's pretty much the project. Go look up it. The directions in the Learn Dot explain what a Markov chain is. It explains everything you need to do. So if you have any questions, just let me know. Yeah, so that's it. Cool. One second. Okay. So without further ado, let's get into some. Let's get into the questions. So, const finder function, right? And that's going to be equal to a function. So this is supposed to what does this one do? So finder function is supposed to take an array and it's supposed to take a callback. And I'm pretty sure what we have to do is we have to loop through this array, call this callback on every single element, and if the answer returns true, then we can return I. Otherwise, we return -1, right? Well, not if it returns true, but if it's true here, right? So the first thing we can do is we can do a loop. So we know that we want to loop through the array, right? And what do we want to do? We want to call this callback on every element. So I could say let returned value equal callback, and I'm going to pass in array at I. So I'm going to call callback, and I'm going to pass in array of I, and that return value will be captured in the variable return value, right? So now I can say if returned value, that means if this is truthy, we can return I, because that is the index at which we found that thing, right? And then if we loop through this and we never hit this if statement, we return -1. Any questions on this? Any questions on finder function? Okay, cool. So that's finder function. Now we'll do chain reaction. Whoa. Chain reaction. Chain reaction now is going to be, it's going to take in a value and it's going to take in an array of callbacks. Okay? So this question I feel like is super easy, except the way that the directions explain what you need to do makes it a lot more complicated. So literally, and there's like a tiny little trick, I guess, to it, but it's not that bad, right? So what we have to do is we have to loop through this array of functions, right? Because a callback is a function, right? We loop through the array of functions, we invoke each one. The first one, we pass in value. Then that will return something, right? And then the next one we call, that return value from here, we have to pass into that one, right? And so on and so forth. So how do we do this? Well, the first thing we can do is we can use our trusty method we just learned, not my for each, right? And what are we going to pass into for each? We are going to pass a function. And it is going to take a singular callback, right? That's what I'm calling this. I could say val or I or whatever I want here, but since it is a callback, I will call it callback, right? And what do we want to do? So basically, we want to invoke callback and pass in value. But how do I capture this return value? If for each doesn't return anything, how can I capture it? I can just say value is now equal to this, because value is defined up here, so that means on the next iteration of for each, value will be altered. And then when we pass in value, it will be that altered value. Then we can just return value. Tricky, right? This could also work if you met like let temp up here and say temp is now going to be equal to callback. Well, temp you could say is equal to value, and you could say temp is now going to be equal to callback of temp, and you could do it like that if you didn't want to change what we passed them, but it doesn't really matter. Same thing. Any questions on chain reaction? Not too bad, right? I feel like this wasn't that bad. Okay? So now we're going to talk about more higher order functions, right? So everything remains the same. Everything that we learned so far, right? Everything remains the same. However, we're going to talk about another aspect of this that we didn't before in the earlier part of the day. We're going to talk about returning functions from functions, okay? So if we said last time that functions are kind of like every other value in JavaScript, meaning you can put them in arrays, store them as values and objects, pass them into other functions, then why can't we also return them, right? So let's say I have const, let's say I have const says hello, right? And that's going to basically take a string, and it's going to console.log. We'll say this is a name, and it's going to console.log hello name, right? Very simple function. So now I'm going to make another function that says get hello, okay? And get hello is going to take a func and return that func. That's all I'm going to do, okay? Now, if I say let greeter equal to get hello, and I pass in says hello, I can now invoke greeter. And what I get over here is hello undefined. So if I pass in Marco here, whoops. If I pass in Marco here, we get hello Marco. So why is this happening, right? Let's walk through this. Let's walk through what happens on line 30. So on line 30, we say we declare a variable greeter, and we set it equal to get hello invoked with says hello. Okay? So we call get hello and pass in says hello. What does get hello do? Get hello takes in a function, which should be says hello, and it just returns that function. So now greeter is this function. So we can just call greeter and pass in Marco, because says hello takes a name, we just say hello name, and we can treat this as says hello. What if I did this? Would hello Marco still work? Would I see hello Marco in the console? Well, I will, but I'll see it if without line 31. Well, it won't be hello Marco, it'll be hello undefined. Now, if I comment this back in, I get a crazy error. Greeter is not a function. So why is that? Because instead of returning the entire function, what we are doing is we are returning that function invoked. So if we invoke this function, that means we're returning the return value of this with nothing passed in, right? So if we're returning the return value of this, that means we have to run this, right? We have to run func. And what is func? It says hello. We didn't pass anything in here, so name is undefined. So we run this, and it's console.log hello undefined, because name is undefined. And if I don't return anything over here, then that means that says hello returns undefined, right? So then this is undefined. So then if this returns undefined, then that means greeter is undefined. And if you try to invoke undefined with Marco, boom, you get an error. Undefined or greeter is not a function. Right? So now, if I just return the entire function without invoking it, greeter becomes says hello. Any questions on this?
Can you walk through that second example one more time where it doesn't work because you have the invoked? Yeah.
So on line 30, we say let greeter, we declare a value greeter, a variable greeter, and we set it equal to get hello, and we pass in says hello. So we set it equal to the return value of get hello, and we pass in the argument says hello. Everyone good on this? So when we call get hello, what happens? We return func called. So we return says hello, right? We return says hello called. So what does this do? You can't return a function invocation. When you do this, you can't return that. Like, this can't be equal to that invoked. When you do this, JavaScript says, oh, you're invoking a function, we need to get a value, right? So we return whatever this returns. When we run this, we have to get what this returns, and then we return it from get hello. And what does says hello return?
Nothing.
It returns undefined, because functions that don't return anything implicitly return undefined. So that means this returns undefined. Get hello returns undefined. So that means greeter is undefined. You see this? This is coming from line 31. Greeter, that's its actual value. So we try to invoke it down here, and we get this error. And this runs up here because of this. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
So like if you have this function, oh, whoops, no, not here. So if you have this function, return hello, and we return hello, right? And we say let what am I equal to return hello invoked, right? What we get is hello. We get the string because we can't set this to what am I. We can't set this function invocation to a variable. We have to run this function and see what it returns. Let me comment this out. But if we change this to just this, what am I is going to be the entire function. Because we're not calling the function. The parentheses are key. The parentheses run the function. Without them, it's just the variable, the function, right? The function name. So if I wanted to do this, what if I defined a function here? And this returns hello world, right? So what am I is now going to be a function. So if I call what am I, let's see what it does. It returns hello world. So you can return functions from parameters, return functions as I showed you before, like I just wrote says hello in here, or you can return anonymous functions like so. Does this make sense? All good? All right. So, now, since this is all good, let's make things a lot more confusing. So we're going to talk about something called closure. This is another rule, okay? Like how pass by reference, pass by value type rule, right? Like this is something that you need to be aware of and something you can use to your advantage. It's not something that you should be avoiding. It's just something that happens regardless if you want it to or not, okay? And you can use this to your advantage if you want. So, closure. So, closure is basically says that a function still has access to variables defined in its parent function even after parent function has stopped running. So, what does that mean? Let's say I have this function hello world. Oh. Hello world, right? Hello world is going to say let name equal Earth. Okay? So, and then here we are going to return an anonymous function. And here we are going to console.log hello name. But I'm going to show you something. So if I say let world greeter equal to hello world invoked, and I console.log world greeter here, we see that we invoke hello world, right? So we get this. Hello world starting. That means the function's starting to run, right? We declare name right before the keyword, return keyword, we say stopping, right? Because when you hit the return keyword, the function's done, right? There's nothing else to do. So hello world has stopped running, effective immediately on line 50. And because we get the return value. And the return value is the function, right? So that means, because of scope, since this is out here, we shouldn't be able to do that, right? But we can. Even though, after line 55, hello world has stopped running, we call world greeter here, and we still have access to this name. That is closure. It's sort of a way to pull out, like, scoped variables, okay? Does that make sense? Like, in this point of time, when we returned this function, right? It console.logs hello and name. In this point of time when we returned it, name was Earth, correct? So if name was Earth, then when we return it here and pull it out into the global scope and use it out here, name is still Earth. It's still going to be Earth. And this is the rule of closure, okay? This is just a rule, okay? Any questions? I see some confused faces. Are you guys okay? Seriously?
Okay, I think where I'm confused is because like on line 57 when you say world greater invoking, that's basically
I'm calling this function.
Yeah, you're calling that function.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But just that part? Oh.
I'm just calling this.
Yeah,
I'm not calling
why doesn't
this.
it invoke like the starting stopping thing?
Yeah, that's maybe where I'm confused too. Yeah.
How do I explain this? So like this function that's highlighted right now. Does this say hello world anywhere inside of it? So it's not going to call this again. This is called here, right? And what does hello world do? Console.log starting, let name equals Earth. Console.log stopping, return this function. What does this function do? It's one line, right? It just console.logs this thing, right?
Yeah,
so the starting stopping runs here when we call hello world. And its return value is this function. So this function gets put into world greeter, right? You guys good on that? So now, as you can see, world greeter is a function, right? So now, when we call world greeter, what does world greeter do? It just console.logs one thing. That's all it does. We don't call this is a separate function. These two things are two different functions. This was defined inside this function, but they're still two different functions. They're not really related to each other. However, since this function was defined inside of here, and it references a variable that was declared in here, it still has access to that. It still does, even though we pulled it out.
Okay, I think what I was not understanding before that I think I now do is world greeter parenthesis is the same thing as like hello world parenthesis. So it's basically getting to like getting just to that like inner function which starts from row 50.
Yeah, like if I did that, we would get world greeter would be undefined because this returns undefined, right? But we see the hello earth here. We see that.
Yeah, because it's console logging that.
Yeah,
Wait,
but if
yeah.
I returned like yo yo yo, right? World greeter is going to be yo yo yo, right? Because we invoke it and then invoke it again.
But we are.
You can chain invocations like this if you wanted to.
So after the return keyword, it's essentially the program knows that it's a different function, so you have to invoke it twice in order to reach that.
Well, no, I mean if I did like const different func is equal to this, and I returned different func, it's the same thing. Because like JavaScript knows this is a different function when I do this. Like when you define like the whole thing with pass by value, pass by reference, right? If you make an array and then inside of that array you make another array, those two arrays are separate arrays. They live in separate places in memory. And the same is true here. This is a separate function. It's defined inside of Hello World, but it is still a separate function. So when we return it here, yeah, what's up?
So then, but world greeter equals hello world. It doesn't equal whatever that function is within inside of hello world, right?
You're saying
when I invoke world greeter there, I have to be invoking hello world somehow, right? Because that's what it equals.
This is true?
No,
this is not true. Right?
right. But what I'm saying is that it has to do with the fact that it's contained within there, and there's a return statement in hello world, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it equals hello world.
No, but I mean, I'm not sure that calling them two separate functions is the best. That's kind of why I'm getting confused, because it's the fact that it's contained, the fact that the function's contained inside of a function that you're calling. It still has access to those variables. No.
Wait, hold on, back up. What are you trying to say?
Well, I mean, if whatever that constant different function was not referring to a variable that was already in hello world. I mean, it's dependent on the name that's in hello world to be able to work when you invoke it down in world greeter, right? So they're not totally separate. They're sharing the variable name.
They're not sharing a variable name. It's accessing a variable that was defined in here.
Right, but that's within the scope of that function.
Yeah, because this is defined inside of it.
Right, but they're not independent then, right?
They are, because I just took it out here. I took it out into the global scope. That means that this function I can call 150 times.
Okay, so then delete hello world and see if it still works.
No, we can't do that because then we can't pull it out.
Okay, but then they're not independent. I mean, that's what independence means as a word, right?
No, but like over here, we don't get starting stopping 50 times. That's what I'm saying. Once that function's called once, it's called one time on line 56. That's it.
Right. It's not being invoked, but it's still they're not independent. That's all I'm trying to say.
Okay, yeah. But back to what we were saying with foo though, like I'm calling these things 4 times, but we don't get this again because Hello World only ran once.
Right. But it's still, they're not independent. That's all I was trying to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, this lives inside of here, but since we're returning it, we can pull it out of that scope and use it on our own. We can never pull it out if it didn't exist in the first place. Like, if I deleted this function, then this would be in the global scope, and this would just be a global function, right? Like, this function will still exist if I just did this, right? Like, it still exists. It's still there. I can't do this anymore, but world greeter would just be, this would just be different func, right? This would be the same thing.
So
without
if we commented
Same
back
thing.
in Hello World and we ran that, then we would get starting stopping 100 times, but we wouldn't get Hello Earth.
Wait, say that again?
Okay, so if we just ran Hello World, like comment back in everything, there you go. So if we just ran World Greeter, no.
No?
If we just ran like Hello World, if we just invoked Hello World, we would just get starting and stopping.
Yeah. Oh, whoops. And it returns different func, right?
Okay, so then
That's all that this
then
does.
they are two different functions because essentially Hello World is just running starting and stopping, and then different func is going to come up with Hello Earth.
Exactly. This will never run, ever, until I set something equal to this, the return value of that, like world greeter, and then I can run this function. And Steve, like you were saying, yeah, right now I can only get different func if I invoke hello world. But if I just pulled this out and just defined it on my own,
Yeah, it would run.
then I can do that the other way. But I'm just trying to say is that like here, well, I'll leave this commented out. Like here, starting stopping only ran once because hello world is not run again because world greeter is this function. And what does this function do? It just console.logs hello name. But what is name, right? The fact is that even though I'm using this out here in the global scope, where it was defined, name was not undefined. Name had a definition up here. So when I defined the function here, name was Earth. That's why we see hello Earth, which is the main point. The main point is that even though I'm calling this later, after this has finished running, hello world finishes running at line 56. After that, it's done running, right? So name should be lost, right? I can't say like console.log name over here, right? I can't do that. However, here, in my call world greeter, Earth is defined. It's not undefined, right? It's because of how closure works.
Can you give an example of when this might be useful?
It'll be useful when you go to the job interview and they say, "What's closure?" and you have to answer the question. You know,
So you don't use this anytime during your job.
That's not true.
Okay. So when do you use it?
It'll be.
Go on. I'm sorry.
It's kind of. This is like more of a complex thing. It's kind of hard to like give you an example of this, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't this part of like scope in that? Okay, more local functions, they'll still have access to outer function variables. So isn't that just part of scope?
You can think of this as part of scope, but it's very specific to functions. Like if I like console.log different func, I can't do that, right? Because of scope. It's defined in here, right? However, I can, when I invoke hello world and I return this function, I can use that function. It'll be a different name, or I can even call it different func if I wanted to confuse everyone even more. This is like a loophole with scope. And it's not like, when would you use this? This is just something that happens, okay? It's just like, this is just how it works, right? You defined it here, and it kind of, I feel like it wouldn't make sense if this didn't work, if name was lost here. Because it all depends on where you declare and define your function, right? So if you declare it here and it's accessing name here, why would that be undefined out here, right? Let's do this once.
Okay, and then sorry, I think this is probably a very stupid question, but like, what
There's
is
no stupid
causing the
question.
starting stopping to console log here? Where are we calling hello world? Is it that? Okay.
Yeah. Like when you set a variable equal to a function being invoked, the
Yeah.
function has to be called. So
Oh,
hello world is being called on line 56.
Okay, so that's not just the definition. We're also invoking it because we have those parentheses.
Exactly. Like if this was here, things would
Yeah.
be different, right? We would never get hello earth, right? Because world greeter would just be hello world. But this is like
Oh, I see. Yeah. So the starting stopping is actually being called by row 59 there because you don't have the set of parentheses after that.
exactly. But now that we invoke it here, this is going to be this function.
Yeah.
Right?
Because
Since we're
again,
returning
world
different-
greeter parentheses is the same thing as hello world parentheses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but closure, back to closure though, like this is why this happens, right? This is why we see hello earth. Because we have access to this variable even though this function has stopped running.
Oh, okay.
Any questions on this?
I don't understand why did you do let world greeter equals hello world? I don't get the world greeter part.
If I didn't do this, and I just called this, and it returned a function. It returns a function, right? So, like, if I don't do that, how can I ever call this function outside here? Like, the goal is to call different func outside here, outside of hello world, right? So, if this returns if this returns that function, how do we, like, capture returned values, right? We put them into variables. So if I capture the return value of hello world into world greeter, that value that's returned from here happens to be a function, right? So I can call this function. And also, this thing, let name equal earth, right? What if this was a parameter? And I passed in Mars, right? This would be the same thing. Because parameters are still locally scoped variable declarations, right? And if I don't pass anything in here, what we get is hello undefined. But it's never going to be a reference error, okay? It's always going to be undefined because this is declared, and when this is declared, this function, when it's defined, name has a value of this parameter. It's looking here. It's looking to this thing. So when we call it with Marco, name is Marco, right? So Marco, oh yeah, let's go back to the planets, right? So Mars, so name is Mars, console.log starting, console.log starting, different func is this function, console.log hello name. Name at this point in time is Mars, and then we return different func. So when we call it down here, we get Mars. Does that make sense? Okay. Like, okay, Drew. Like, a real world example of this is caching. You know, like your browser's cache? Like cache history? This is a real world example of that. And that is part of the workshop, okay? So, like, this is like a high, I don't know, it's like a higher, like, complex thing, Clojure, to like use it to your advantage, in my opinion, but it exists everywhere, okay? And it's important to, it really is important to know, and it's important to grasp these concepts, okay?
My question is, like, why wouldn't, since it is like essentially two different functions, why wouldn't you just define them individually? Like, why does it need to be together?
So here is, I'll show you. Here's this example. So let's say I was writing a testing framework, right? Like, you know those like describe it blocks, those tests? Let's say I was writing my own framework that you can install on your computer and use it whenever. And let's say one of those things I wanted to write a spy function, right? And this function, what it does, let's say it defines count to be 0, right? How did you do this again? This is like and let's say it takes a callback. And no, this was wrong. Hold on a second. It calls the callback. No. Okay, I forgot how to do this because this is a little complicated. But like, let's say I was doing this, like the spy function, right? I was writing a framework myself. And what I would do is, like here, like the general logic would be write this function that you can use, and it has its own inner count. And then it keeps track of how many times you're calling a certain function. So like if you're testing something and you're spying on, and I'm spying on your function, then this will return the number of times it was called. So this is a bad example, but like that's another way that this could be used. Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll go to the slides. Okay? So we're just going to talk about returning functions from functions and Clojure. So we know that functions can return values. So as you can see, function returns a string, returns I am a string. We say let return value equals return string invoked. So that means we call returns a string, it returns I am a string, so return value is I am a string. Everyone good here? In the previous unit, we learned that functions are like any other value in JavaScript, right? So if functions can return values and functions are values, functions can return other functions. So let's say I have greetMe, console.log hi. Function getGreeter returns greetMe. We're returning the function without calling it, okay? So if I have let greeter equal getGreeter, console.log type of greeter, console.log greeter, and then we run greeter. So as you can see, the type of greeter is this function. What is it? It's this function greetMe, and when we run it, we get hi, right? Because when we invoke getGreeter returns greetMe, a function, and we don't invoke it. So greeter becomes greetMe. Is everyone okay with this?
So greetMe is not invoked.
Yes.
Because
we are pulling it out of getGreeter and setting it equal to greeter. So now greeter effectively becomes greetMe. If we did invoke this, right? What if we did invoke this?
It gets undefined.
Exactly, because we're returning what greetMe returns, right? Because when we invoke something, we have to return something, right? So if we return what this returns, what does greetMe return? Undefined, right? Because anything that doesn't return something returns undefined. So we see hi here because we run it here, right? But then type of greeter is undefined. What greeter is undefined. And then you get the type error when you try to invoke undefined. So if we lost these parentheses, then we wouldn't be running greetMe here. We would just be returning the entire function. That makes sense, right? All right, cool. So here we have this function getGreeter, and then we define inside of getGreeter something called greetMe. And then we just return greetMe inside of getGreeter. So here on line 10, we have let greeter equal getGreeter invoked. We invoke greeter and we get hi. Does that make sense? Okay. So here we can, as I showed you before in my REPL, we can return anonymous functions as well, right? So when we say let greeter equal getGreeter, we call getGreeter. What does this do? It just returns this whole function. So greeter becomes this whole function. So when we invoke greeter on line 9, we get hi. Cool, everybody? All right. What if our return function takes a parameter, right? It behaves the same way, okay? So if this return function is declared as it takes, like when we define the function, we write into its function definition a parameter, that gets copied over to greeter when it's returned, right? When we return a function, we return the whole thing, including any parameters it might take. So that means that greeter takes a parameter, right? And it says hi to that parameter, name, right? Mary, Rosalind, hi, undefined, because we didn't pass anything in. So that means name would be undefined. That makes sense, right? That should be fine. That should be fine. Okay. So let's talk about Clojure for a second. So a scope refresher, before we talk about Clojure, let's review how scope works with nested functions, right? Inner functions can access variables defined in outer functions, right? So if I say function greeter, and I say let says hi equal function console.log name, hi name, and then I run hi inside of greeter, we get hi Mary, right? Because what does scope do, right? First it looks for something called name inside of its own scope, can't find it, so it looks one scope up. Here's name, Mary, so I say hi Mary. This is scope, we did this earlier on, right? And now everything is a lot easier, right? So Clojure is the fact that an inner function can still access values defined in the outer function even after the outer function is finished running, okay? That is the definition of Clojure, okay? So let's say I have this function getGreeter, okay?
Say that again, that last bit you just said. The definition of Clojure.
Clojure is the fact that any inner function can still access values defined inside of its outer function even after the outer function is finished running.
Alright.
Okay?
Sorry.
So we have this function getGreeter, right? So we console.log getGreeter is running. Let name equals Mary. Console.log getGreeter is finishing. Return a function, and that function that we're returning, console.logs, hi name. Let greeter equal getGreeter invoked. So that means, what is this? What is greeter going to be? What does getGreeter return? Boom, this function right here. So greeter is this function. When we invoke greeter, we say getGreeter is running, getGreeter is finishing, and these two lines up here are coming from line 13. Then when we run line 14, we see hi Mary. It's because name was defined up here. All right. What if getGreeter takes a parameter, right? So if function getGreeter and returns function console.log hi name, but the name is now defined inside of the parameter, right? The parameter is the variable name. So when we say let greeter equal getGreeter, there we have to pass in Rosalind, right? So name will always be Rosalind every time we call greeter. Hi, Rosalind. This should be the same thing as saying let name equal Rosalind over here. But now we just did it in a different way. Does that make sense? All right. What if both functions took parameters? It would be the same thing, right? So function getGreeter of name1 returns function name2. Console.log hi plus name1 meet name2, right? So that means when we run getGreeter on line 8, we pass in Mary, right? So name1 is Mary, and it returns function that takes in name2, console.log hi, this is going to be Mary, because that's what it was when we called it, meet name2, which is nothing right now. So we call greeter Rosalind, so that means name2 should be Rosalind, because greeter is this function, right? So we get hi Mary, meet Rosalind. Does this make sense? All right, a little bit. So here is an example of how we're just using this to make English-sounding functions, right? So now getGreeter is the same thing over here, but I'm going to say let introduce Mary to is going to be equal to getGreeter Mary, because that's the person we're going to be introducing to, right? So, and then getGreeter of Rosalind will be introduce Rosalind to. So we'll say introduce Mary to Dorothy. Hi Mary, meet Dorothy. Introduce Mary to Albert. Hi Mary, meet Albert. Introduce Rosalind to Barbara. Hi Rose, meet Barbara. And so on and so forth, right? This is the same as the previous slide, except now we're just naming things differently and seeing how it flows, right? Same shebang over here. And that's all I got for you for this stuff. Any questions? No questions? Nada?
I have one question.
What's up,
Is there-
Steve?
So if closure is defined as an inner variable still having access to variables defined in an...
Wait. You cut out the first.
If closure is defined as an inner function still having access to variables defined in a outer function or a global function or whatever, but it seems like the crux of the matter is that we're returning the function, right? The inner function.
Yeah, because otherwise it's like it's not that it has access to variables defined in the outer function. It's the fact that it has access to the variables in the outer function after the outer function is done running. That is the only reason why closure works. Otherwise, it's like whatever. If we just, like in one of the examples, how inside of the outer function we invoked the inner function in there, then that's just a scope matter, right? That's just a scope issue. But the fact that we can return functions, that's where closure comes in. This only exists because we can return functions. Otherwise, this isn't a thing, right?
So that's kind of so linking in my mind closure to the returning of functions is accurate.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay.
Does the function have to be run once before like that inner thing can be accessed, or does that not matter? Like, does the main function, the main outer function, need to be like run once before we can do like that? We can kind of like do that closure thing and access the inner function, or does that not matter? Like, can you do it from the get-go? I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense. So you can't, because to even access the inner function, you have to return it, right? So how do you return it? You have to call the outer function, right? So you have to run that outer function once. Then that inner function you can use in everywhere, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. So if there's no other questions, I guess we can just get started on the workshop. So before, wait, let me just stop recording this.